Ladies and gentlemen, our next honoree is the world acclaimed novelist, journalist, essayist, literary critic, and much more, who received the 2010 Nobel Prize in Literature. As the Nobel Committee stated, quote, "For his cartography of structures of power and his trenchant images of the individual's resistance, revolt, and defeat," unquote. A native of Peru and a member of the Royal Spanish Academy, he's the author of more than 30 books and 9 plays. 2 of his books have been made into major films, and many other awards. And also in 2010, he was decreed by King Juan Carlos I to become the first Marquis of Vargas Llosa. I'd like to share with us now a video about Mario Vargas Llosa.
Reciba il Premio Nobel della Literatura Mario Vargas Llosa.
I had no imagined, before that socialism could represent a system so brutally repressive.
For 5 decades, Mario Vargas Llosa has captivated the world with his novels, leading to his recognition with the 2010 Nobel Prize in Literature. Like many Latin American writers, he was once a socialist. But if you assume Vargas Llosa conforms to the stereotype of a left-wing artist, you'll find yourself mistaken.
Which of these is your favorite caricature?
Oh, well, no, none. None. When Alan Garcia tried to nationalize the banks, we protest, I wrote a manifest and we published with 100 signatures.
As a writer, Vargas Llosa has made a career out of defending his principles and questioning the assumptions of others.
In my youth, I was a Marxist, I was a socialist. I had the idea that the only way in which we could fight all the injustices, the enormous inequalities, the exploitation of the poor by the very small minority of rich, was socialism. I went 5 times to Cuba in the 60s. And then I started to discover that reality was not as the image that I had, that I wanted to have of the Cuban Revolution. It was a fantastic euphemism, And actually there were concentration camps in which were put together, dissidents of common criminals, gays, and also people who were conspiring against the revolution. I remember that I wrote a letter to Fidel saying, I cannot understand, This is totally against what you have said, what we thought that the Cuban Revolution was. And as other writers make a kind of protest about this, Fidel invited us to have a discussion with him. He was very impressive, but he was not convincing at all, Utopia, which has produced the most extraordinary masterworks in art, in literature, philosophy, in social terms, has always been the most dangerous incentive of goal, because each time in history that a society has tried to materialize a kind of utopic vision of a perfect world has produced the most brutal, and criminal kinds of regimes.
After his experiences in Cuba and a trip to the Soviet Union in 1967, Vargas Llosa began to use his writing to speak out against totalitarian regimes.
Private enterprise and the entrepreneur represent exploitation, discrimination, privilege. This is a prejudice that is deeply, deeply rooted in countries in which people have been suffering for centuries of the corruption and inefficacy of the state intervention in the economy.
Mario Vargas Llosa has reached beyond his writing to spread the ideas of liberty. Starting his own think tank in Spain, he has publicly challenged socialist leaders such as Venezuela's Hugo Chavez.
I am very grateful to institutions like Atlas, which are conscious of the importance of ideas if we want to reform society, if we want to destroy this very negative tradition of authoritarianism. Keep the spirit alive, keep fighting on, because the victory is attainable, is there. It depends on us. We are the only responsibles of what will happen in the world, you know.
Our next speaker has also served as an honorary co-chair for our gala tonight. Jorge Quiroga is the former president of Bolivia, having been previously elected vice president in 1997, the youngest person to ever held that office. Mr. Quiroga has also been Bolivian Minister of Finance and Undersecretary of Public Investment and International Cooperation at the Ministry of Planning. He received his bachelor's degree in industrial engineering, summa cum laude, from Texas A&M University, and MBA from St. Edward's University. He's been the recipient of the World Leader of Tomorrow Award from the World Economic Forum, and he's served as a board member for many international organizations such as the World Bank, the Andean Development Corporation, and others. I'm very privileged to introduce Jorge Quiroga.
Thank you, David, and good evening. Congratulations to David, Mary, the Independent Institute, all the board members, the honorees this evening, and the Institute deserves very warm congratulations for turning 25. We're both 25. The Institute for the first time, myself for the second time, but 25 at last. When I was asked about participating in this, I said some people may immediately suspect there's a whiff of nepotism here because Alvaro Vargas Llosa, sitting there with a bright red bow tie, has been affiliated with the Independent Institute for a long time. So I did some investigating, and rest assured there is no nepotism whatsoever. The Swedish Academy was not influenced by the great work that the Independent Institute does or what Alvaro has done to award Mario the Nobel Prize. It was purely on his own that he got the Nobel Prize for literature. It may have held him back a few years. I am from Bolivia, a neighboring country with Peru. If you've heard anything about Bolivia, if you're living in the US, you probably have heard about Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid meeting their demise over there, Che Guevara's last trip, and a few other things in my country. But I guarantee you, you do not know that when Mario got the Nobel Award, he recognized his wonderful wife, Patricia, and he said, she does everything, and she does everything well, including picking the place where she was born. She was born in my hometown, Cochabamba, Bolivia. And don't clap yet for Cochabamba. The first phrase in the Nobel acceptance speech that Mario gave said, and I quote, "I learned to read at the age of 5 in Brother Justiniano's class at La Salle School in Cochabamba, Bolivia. It is the most important thing that has ever happened to me," end quote. So it was, when he won the prize, Peruvians were naturally proud, and we felt like we had a little bit of a share on that as well. I learned how to read and write in Cochabamba as well, so I can read what he writes. But it helps. In my hometown, it was obligatory when you're growing up, wishing you could play chess like Bobby Fischer, play soccer like a Brazilian, sing like an Argentinian. reading Verne, Salgari, Agatha Christie. Then when you got to a certain age, 13, 14, they gave you the first Vargas Llosa book with a sense of almost pride and ownership that he had gone through our town for a few years and learned how to read and write there. And I've admired him ever since. And I know we live in a different world now. We're here close to the heart of technological change. This is where the world has gone from written communications and paper to the fax machine to electronic communications and mobility. In this part of U.S. is where you're responsible for people making the transition that I've made, writing with hand wrapped around a pen on a paper, to 10 keys on a 10 fingers on a typewriter, 10 fingers on the PC, then 2 thumbs on the smartphone, then the 1 finger swiping, then the dictation with the iPhone and whatever else comes around. And you sometimes lose sight of the fact that what matters is the content. Those are just delivery, speedy, more efficient mechanisms. I gave Mario's Nobel acceptance speech to all my kids, autographed, because it is, one, the best defense and explanation of why you should stop texting sometimes and get immersed and lost in a book. Number 2, the best demonstration of the inextricable link between creative freedom in literature and democracy and rule of law. And that lecture, if you haven't seen it, take a look at it. It will help you understand why many of us in Latin America have been dazzled by his literature for a long time. We have gained strength from the clarity of his convictions and have been inspired by his ideas for a long, long time. Now, if you're into literature, somebody asked me in Buenos Aires last year when he had just gotten the prize, tell me one book I can read. That's like asking a wine lover in California to pick just one wine. So can I take them all? Or at least a 12-pack or a 6-pack. But if you have to pick, and pick you must, well, the trilogy, Conversation in the Cathedral, I'm partial to that. War at the End of the World and Feast of the Goat are my preference. But Mario's importance transcends literature because he did not stop there. He means more for the defense of liberty and freedom than probably he has meant to literature, and that's saying a lot. I learned that a few weeks ago I was in Tunisia observing the election, and you get somewhat callous about democracy after a while because you vote all the time. But to see people vote for the very first time with tears in their eyes is certainly heart-moving. Because they had gone from the French to Bourguiba to Ben Ali. They had never voted for real, for free, ever, and it was the first time. And one gentleman who was active in the resistance to Ben Ali, who had been jailed, mentioned that he had seen in the internet while he was in jail the great writer, didn't quite know the last name, that in Peru resisted authoritarian regimes and the marches that took place. Just to show you that what he does inspires people in ways that you cannot fathom and in places that you cannot even imagine, including Tunisia. Now, the term that gets applied to Mario is liberal, which is a very dangerous term because that's pejorative, applied to left-wingers in the U.S., particularly San Francisco, I must say, if you're from Texas, Oklahoma. But in Latin America, it gets applied to people on the quote-unquote right wing. So what Mario really is an intellectual on the cause of freedom and democracy. And his major contribution in Latin America was the following. For a long time, we thought that the dichotomy applied, the false choice was true, that you had to pick between a dictatorship in uniform or street revolution, that you had to settle between Pinochet and Castro, that you had to accept losing some political liberties so you could get more economic liberties, or losing some economic liberties so you could get the rest of the political liberties. And it was deeply ingrained in the Latin American psyche, and intellectuals bought into it, and progressives bought into it, and analysts and great writers perpetuated that myth. And his single greatest contribution was to demolish single-handedly that false choice that we were faced with. And to say that the real choice is between a full democracy or authoritarian regimes. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. And you can say no to Pinochet, to Castro, to Franco. You can't say no to secular dictatorships in the Arab world and to Islamic fascists as well. You can't say no to party dictatorships like they had in Mexico or to single-person tyrannies like the one that reigns in Venezuela now. And his critics in Latin America, you will hear that column in a pejorative sense that he's from the right. I beg to differ, he's not from the right. He is ultra-right. He is for the right to express yourself freely, for the right to own property, for the right to vote, for the right to rule of law, and for the right to live in a democracy where you pick your own rulers through your will. That is ultra-right in terms of what democracy and freedom means. I'll move over to his influence in Latin America. Right now, we are doing very well. At the turn of the century, had you said that by 2011, Latin America will have 3 seats at the table of the G20, the 20 large countries that discuss governance issues, nobody would have believed it. And no one would have believed in the year 2000 had you said, at this meeting of the G20, Latin American countries can go and say to the large G8 countries, we grow twice as fast as you do, we have half the debt as percent of GDP than you do, and we have a quarter of the fiscal deficit as percent of GDP than you do. And we were supposed to be taking lessons all this time. And furthermore, we've reduced poverty from 44 to 32%. Middle classes have come on board. We have sound fiscal policy, sound monetary policy, solid exchange rates, good banking regulation. And I know that lots of the attention gets focused on Alba, Chavez, Castro, and they're very good at handling that. Chavez is the single best combination of CNN, MTV, History Channel, Comedy Central, Religious Broadcasting Network, all rolled into one. They do know how to attract attention, but if you look at the reality of Latin America, where more than 80% of what's happening is Mexico, Brazil, Peru, Panama, Colombia, Chile, Dominican Republic, Uruguay, you will find open economies and democracies with alternation of power. There's plenty of people that have contributed to this, but to me, 2 take the top prize. One is the greatest statesman that South America has produced, Cardoso in Brazil, who fixed Brazil, don't ever say forever, but I think pretty much forever, by going through all the crises and setting a path that his successor had to keep going down that same path, Lula. And if you fix Brazil, it's not the same as fixing Guatemala or Honduras. With all due respect, you fix 40% of the people of Latin America and more than half the economy. But the second in that regard, who was not in public office, is Mario Vargas Llosa. And these open market economies and democracies with alternation of power. And the Brazilian once said, democracies are for presidents knowing and learning how to pack their bags on the date they're supposed to leave. And that was it's not a small issue. That and the Chinese bonanza and the Chinese prices have helped us get to where we are. But I can guarantee you no one has contributed more to create and generate the intellectual underpinnings and the support to have this great moment that we now enjoy than Mario has. And look at his country. The second round certainly presented what to many were unpalatable choices, but the real unpalatable choice was for the one who's now president, Humala, because he had to pick between being linked to Chavez with the petro-tyrannical regime he exports, or being linked to the champion of freedom and democracy, Mario Vargas Llosa. And let me tell you, those are binary. You pick one or the other. You do not mix and mingle there. And I am confident of Peru's good future because I know that they have the best bodyguard you could ever have. Mario Vargas Llosa, for the sake of Peruvian democracy and its future. And one more thing, it's easy to keep it in words and writings. Mario doesn't just leave it there. I'm glad he never heard Michael Jordan, the great basketball player's advice. He was once asked to endorse a Democratic congressional candidate, and he said, no, Republicans buy sneakers too. And there's lots of them. I'm sure that his publishers and agents said, oh my God, you're creating controversy. You know, the other side they read books too, they buy books too. But his principles and convictions were never for sale. And he not only put it in writing, I can tell you 2 instances, and some of you may have been there. 4 years ago, Rosario, Argentina, big forum, and the guys on the other side, when they cannot argue with his ideas or his persuasive powers, what do? They hire a few Trotskys, there's a few left in this world, to go throw bricks and stones at the bus. Because, wars fly by, bricks and stones break your bones, so they use that. And that night, he was not deterred. He kept at it, and he kept going, even though they were throwing bricks and stones at this bus in Rosario. 2 years ago, second instance, in Caracas, Venezuela, because the ones of us that are in this struggle, we have to go through this. He could just sit and write books. He doesn't have to mess with these things. And he goes to Caracas, and Chavez detains him at the airport for an hour and a half. They check his bags. I'm sure the last time he had his bags checked was probably when he went to Paris as a young man, probably a small bag. But that's the aggravation. He doesn't have to put up with that. He could just sit, write somewhere, and be popular with everybody, but he fights for his ideas with plenty of conviction and is a great example to everybody. And I can tell you one thing for a fact. Anywhere in the world where there's fanatical despotism, authoritarian regimes of the religious persuasion, the parental persuasion, the racial, class, ideological, whichever kind, 2 things for sure. It won't last for long, and Mario Vargas Llosa will be on the other side fighting for democracy and freedom. I can assure you, you may find writers on the literary field that you like better. Not for me. For me, he's number 1 by far. But you can probably quibble with that and give me a couple names. You may find people that do as much as he's done in terms of fighting for democracy and freedom. But I guarantee you will never find one human being that has this incredible combination of the greatest literary talent ever with a conviction for freedom and a passion for democracy as Mario Vargas Llosa. Thank you.
Mario, you have devoted your life to excellence in the literary arts, but you've gone far further in courageously using your talent and public stature to boldly champion civil and economic liberties and overcome the plight of people living under any form of tyranny. And to express our gratitude, I'm most delighted to present you with the Independent Institute's Alexis de Tocqueville Award.
Ladies and gentlemen, after those things that Jorge Quiroga has said about me, anything I can say will be such anticlimax, I am deeply grateful to Mary and David Theroux and the Independent Institute for honoring me with this award. And I am deeply grateful too to Jorge Quiroga for all these lies that he has said. He's such a friend that is able to lie in order to honor a friend. This award has been created in honor of Alexis de Tocqueville, which is like a character of a great novel. I have great admiration for him. He was a great adventurer. He was a great thinker. He was a very elegant writer. And he was a very subtle and clever observer of his time. As you know, he came to America when he was still very young to study the penal system, the prisons of America. But of course, what he did was much more important than that. He stayed here 2 years, I think. He traveled, he talked with people, and since the beginning, he was fascinated with this new and young democracy. And he left a fantastic testimony of what was America in those years. I think he was the first European to perceive that in this young democratic republic, freedom had a larger and deeper meaning than in the European democracies. And he documented this observation with examples. I think he was one of the first visitors of America that perceived that in America, the citizens had a great suspicion of the state, unlike what traditionally happened in Europe, where the citizens were always expecting that the state resolve their problems. He discovered that in America, individual liberty was as and maybe more important than social and political liberty. He discovered that there was a consensus in this young republic in the idea that the state existed to service the citizens and not the citizens to serve the state. He established these very subtle and in the long run, very essential differences with the traditional democracies and the new one that was starting to flourish in America. I think what Alexis de Tocqueville was the first person in observe, admire, and documented in this extraordinary book, which is La Démocratie en Amérique, is the roots of the extraordinary development of the United States of America. These roots were born out of a kind of commitment to liberty as something that is indivisible, something that cannot be separated in fragments, something that in order to work should be respected and promoted simultaneously in all orders of social life. Political freedom, economic freedom, cultural freedom, individual freedom. This was the recipe that converted this young republic that Alexis de Tocqueville visited in the first years of the 19th century in the extraordinary country that United States has been. I think it's important to remember this now in this period in which so many voices say that the United States is in decline, that the crisis that the Western world is living will be the frontier, after which what United States has been in history will disappear, and other nations will replace its leadership. I don't think this is true, and I think this will be true in the near future. And I don't say that to please my auditorium, in which Americans, I suppose, are the majority, but out of a deep conviction that this extraordinary presence of liberty and freedom that Alexis de Tocqueville discovered and admired and described so beautifully in his essay is still there in the roots of this society, and that it will depend entirely of the citizens of this still young republic that United States overcomes the difficult period and the challenges that is facing, and recover the force, the impetus, the creativity that impressed so much Alexis de Tocqueville. We need this because in all modern history, United States has always been at the avant-garde in the defense of the culture of freedom. It was United States who saved Western world during the First World War. It was United States who saved freedom, democracy, and civilization when the fascist threat practically destroyed 3/4 of Europe and was at the point of submerge Western civilization. It was United States who was at the avant-garde, resisting the most serious threat that democracy has faced in its history, communism. The threats to freedom have not disappeared. There are still surrounding the democracies of the world. It is true that this culture of freedom has been winning spaces, conquering new territories that now has taken roots in Asia. As Jorge Quiroga said, is now deeply rooted also in many countries in Latin America. But the threats are still enormous. And I don't think that the present circumstances there is another country that has the vocation, the commitment, and the tradition to be at the avant-garde in the defense of the most important thing that has happened to humankind. The creation of a civilization of freedom in which violence has not disappeared, but has diminished as never happened in any other kind of society, and in which, because of freedom, humankind has reached a levels of existence, of security and coexistence that never existed in the past. So I would like to finish with these words of optimism on the future of United States, because I think that to believe that United States will be always in this avant-garde in the defense of civilization is a way to say that freedom, democracy, and civilization has a future in our immediate history. I think the name of Alexis de Tocqueville is so important that an award that is called Alexis de Tocqueville is much more than a recognition. It's a mandate of rigor, of commitment in defense of certain values, the first of which is, of course, liberty, freedom. And I don't need to say again that I will do my best in order to be up to this honor and to this responsibility. Thank you very much. David, thank you very much. Thank you. Very kind. Okay. Thank you. Okay. I return. Okay. Thank